So now we come to para 4, proof of work. So now it reads as to implement a distributed timestamp server on peer-to-peer basis, we will need to use a proof of work system similar to Adam Back's Hashcash rather than newspaper or Usenet posts. Okay. Now what is Hashcash? Adam Back's Hashcash. Now I'll just revise upon, although I have discussed in one of the videos. So, but it is a small thing, but very important. So Hashcash was proposed in 1997 by Adam Back, and a formal paper titled Hashcash a Denial of Service Countermeasure was subsequently published in 2002. So Hashcash, what exactly it refers to is, it is a cryptographic hash based proof of work algorithm that requires a selectable amount of work to compute, but the proof can be verified efficiently. Now simple for email uses for preventing email spams. Earlier in the 90s, spam was a very big problem. Of course, it is even today, but now we have relatively better controls over email spams. But in 90s, it was a big problem. So email boxes of all the users used to be spammed by thousands of unnecessary messages. So what he proposed was that for email uses, a textual encoding of a hashcash stamp is added to the header of an email to prove that the sender has expended a modest amount of CPU time calculating the stamp prior to sending the email. So in other words, what is exactly it means is that as the sender has taken a certain amount of time to generate the stamp and send the email, it is unlikely that they or he is a spammer. So what basically it boils down to is that if a user is sending a genuine email, maybe one email CC to about 4, 5, 10 guys, so the amount of CPU power that he will have to expand or to use will be relatively low, and that won't be stressing enough for the CPU hardware. But when he is playing the role of a spammer, so suppose as a spammer somebody has to send about 5,000 emails or 10,000 emails at bulk. So that kind of computing effort will have to be required to send them all together, which otherwise would have been just a send button. You simply click the send button and all the 1,000, 10,000 mails are sent across to all the users, basically spamming them. But when this Hashcash was proposed, for a simple email to go, no problem. For limited emails, about 5, 10, maybe 15, 20, no problem. Because that much amount of CPU power is not a problem for any computer user. But when he is planning to spam with thousands of emails, so he'll have to have that kind of computing capacity. In case he is not having that kind of computing capacity in his hardware, it is obvious that he will not be able to send the email. So basically it is kind of preventing the spamming. So now it moves further. The proof of work involves scanning for a value that, when hashed, such as with SHA-256, the hash begins with a number of 0 bits. The average work required is exponential in the number of 0 bits required and can be verified by executing a single hash. For our timestamp network, we implement the proof of work by incrementing a nonce in the block until a value is found that gives the block hash the required 0 bits. Once the CPU effort has been expended to make it satisfy the proof of work, the block cannot be changed without redoing the work. As later blocks are changed after it, the work to change the block would include redoing all the blocks after it. So now I'll just try to explain it simply. Suppose I have a text file. And you just be synonymous, you take it synonymous with a transaction, that some amount of bitcoins have been transferred from one node to another. So what happens is this forms a transaction. Now this transaction has a unique hash, SHA-256 in this case. So imagine that what kind of time will it take for me to compute the SHA-256 hash for a small transaction. It is just a matter of pressing enter. The moment you press the enter button and you give after giving the command SHA-256 MD5 sum or whatever hash you are planning to calculate for the text file or for any kind of file, it takes a few seconds and relatively much smaller for smaller files. So for bigger files it may be more, but here we are considering only, so it doesn't take any hard times or any long times. But how this Hashcash has been applied is that when the hash comes, so hash comes automatically and it doesn't take time. But when you want that the hash of a particular transaction should be prefixed by a certain number of zeros. So for example, I have a text file, I take a hash of it, so absolutely I get it immediately. But when I want that the hash of this particular text file should be such that the hash begins with 4 zeros. So how do I do that? For that, I will have to end a number which is known as nonce. So when I add this number nonce to this text file and then I calculate the hash, I will be getting a hash which is prefixed by a certain number of zeros, 4 zeros as mandated or as required. So when the thing started in 2009, the first block, there were about, you can check up 3, 4, 5 zeros. But over a period of time, as the difficulty increased, these number of zeros today stand at about 18, 19. So for a block, when a hash is calculated, a nonce has to be added, which after being appended with this block gives out a hash which is prefixed by 19 zeros. And the amazing thing is that this nonce, the value of nonce, this cannot be calculated. This has to be guessed. This has to be played over by the computing power, how much is the computing power of that CPU, etc. So hashes per second, how much of hashes per second the CPU will be able to calculate. So that is where the mining comes. So the miners, when we see or when we hear out that they are planning, they are solving a mathematical puzzle. So this is the mathematical puzzle what they are talking about. So in all, this is in brief. Otherwise, I have a video on this peculiar, so I will put in the description. So you have a file, you get the hash, but you want the hash in such a manner that it is prefixed by a certain number of zeros. For example, if we consider today, so we need about 18, 19 zeros prefixed. So to find those 18, 19 zeros hash, we have to add something to it, and which is known as nonce. And when we add this nonce, the hash comes out as 18, 19. So this is what all proof of work is. This is all what mining is. So this complete paragraph explaining this only. So I'll just read out the other part of the paragraph. The proof of work also solves the problem of determining representation in majority decision making. If the majority were based on an IP address one node, it could be subverted by anyone able to allocate many IPs. Proof of work is essentially one CPU, one vote. The majority decision is represented by the longest chain, which has the greatest proof of work effort invested in it. Now, here you should be able to correlate what this greatest proof of work is referring to. Now, the greatest proof of work, what Satoshi Nakamoto is referring to here is that till a particular moment, a particular time, the number of blocks which have been indexed in the blockchain, they have, because each block requires a certain amount of proof of work. Each block requires a certain amount of computing power which has been calculated by different miners and nodes. So all that basically refers to some kind of an effort. So this is that effort trying to compute that nonce after investing huge hardware. While in the last decade, the calculation of nonce was relatively easy. In the early 2010-11, it was at a desktop level. But as the times have increased, as the difficulty level has increased from 4 zeros, 5 zeros, it is today come down to 18, 19 zeros. That requires a phenomenal kind of mining hardware. So we go further. If a majority of CPU power is controlled by honest nodes, the honest chain will grow the fastest and outpace any competing chains. To modify a past block, an attacker would have to redo the proof of work of the block and all the blocks after it, and then catch up with and surpass the work of honest nodes. So today we have millions of blocks already indexed in the blockchain. So if an attacker is planning to modify some transaction, is planning to alter a transaction in some past block, he will have to redo that kind of computing effort, because each block will require a computing effort that may not be possible. When I say may not be possible, it is may. It is cannot. There is a may in it. There is a possibility. Now what that possibility is, that possibility refers to 51% attack, for which I will not discuss it out here. because it is beyond the purview of the current paragraph. For now, just understand that anybody trying to alter a block will have to redo the complete proof of work of each block which has been indexed. So now we move further. We will show later that the probability of a slower attack catching up diminishes exponentially as subsequent blocks are added. So obviously, when more blocks are added, the number of blocks increases. So that means in case some attacker plans or is successful in getting some kind of intrusion into the blockchain, he is able to modify some transactions and he is planning to alter the blockchain, affect the blockchain. That may not be actually possible, because that kind of computing power, he will have to have that kind of computing power. And today when we have about 18.5 million bitcoins already done up, it may be relatively difficult. Again, I am using the word maybe, because 51% attack is possible. So to compensate for increasing hardware speed and varying interest in nodes, in running nodes over time, the proof of work difficulty is determined by a moving average targeting an average number of blocks per hour. If they are generated too fast, the difficulty increases. So these three lines, the last two compensate for increasing hardware onwards. Now this I have a absolutely separate video which is known as target and difficulty, which I'll put an I button and also mention in the description. So that particular video completely explains these three lines. The adjustment, how after every 2015 blocks the difficulty is adjusted, of how every 2015 the difficulty is compared, and then the difficulty is adjusted so that every block is subsequently mined with an average of 10 minutes. So each Bitcoin block which is mined, it just takes 10 minutes ideally. So at times it may take 15-20 minutes, but overall every 2016, when this difficulty is adjusted, it boils down, it brings down that difficulty back to a state where only 10 to 11 minutes are taken per block to be mined. So this ends the paragraph number 4, proof of work.